Imagine stepping into the woods with sunlight filtering through the trees, birds calling somewhere overhead, the ground firm beneath your boots, and the comforting certainty that you'll be back before dark. Because every lost hiker story begins exactly like this, with confidence, as the video opens on slow, mist-drenched footage of an ancient forest standing unnaturally still. The narration quietly asks, what if the forest isn't just quiet? What if it's listening? Because across the world, in national parks, mountain ranges, and protected wilderness zones, hikers continue to vanish under circumstances so strange, they leave behind more questions than footprints. And while authorities classify many of these cases as accidents or exposure, survivors and search teams describe something far more unsettling: a sudden, overwhelming sense of disorientation, a feeling that the forest itself has subtly shifted, rearranging landmarks, bending sound, and erasing direction. This is not a story about recklessness or poor planning, because many of those who disappeared were experienced hikers, guides, and outdoor professionals who knew how to read maps, follow trails, and respect nature. Yet at some point during their journey, something changed, and it often began with silence, not peaceful silence, but an unnatural absence of sound, so complete it triggered panic, as if the forest had collectively decided to stop breathing. One documented style account describes a hiker who stepped off a marked trail for less than a minute to take a photograph, only to turn back and find the path gone, not hidden, not blocked, but simply absent, replaced by identical rows of trees stretching endlessly in every direction, each step forward feeling heavier, as though the woods were subtly resisting movement. And this is where the psychological spiral begins, because the human brain relies on familiar cues: sound, symmetry, repetition to navigate. And when those cues vanish, fear fills the gaps. Survivors often report hearing whispers that weren't voices, but patterns in the wind that felt intentional, leaves rustling at irregular intervals, footsteps that stopped when they stopped, and the terrifying sensation of being observed without ever seeing anything watching them. Search and rescue teams have quietly acknowledged finding abandoned gear placed neatly along trails, boots aligned, backpacks resting upright, phones powered off despite full batteries, as if their owners had calmly set them down and walked away. Behavior that contradicts panic, hypothermia response, or survival instinct. And this contradiction is what makes these cases so disturbing, because it suggests not chaos, but surrender. As the narration deepens, the video reframes the forest not as a monster, but as a pressuring, ancient, indifferent force that doesn't chase, doesn't roar, doesn't reveal itself, but simply waits, allowing exhaustion, fear, and confusion to do the work, turning hours into days and confidence into desperation. And for those still missing, the woods never release answers, only fragments. As part one draws toward its close, the camera lingers on a narrow trail disappearing into fog, and the voice lowers, reminding viewers that most disappearances don't happen miles off route, but frighteningly close to safety, sometimes within earshot of roads or campsites, reinforcing the chilling truth that once the forest breaks your sense of direction, distance becomes meaningless. And before fading to black, the narrator calmly introduces the channel. Welcome to True Terror Files Official, where real fear doesn't come from monsters, but from moments when reality itself turns hostile, and invites viewers to stay because, in Part 2, we move beyond the silence and into the documented cases themselves, the last messages, the strange discoveries, and the moments where entire search operations stopped making sense, proving that some woods don't need traps or teeth. They only need time. When hikers vanish, the real horror doesn't begin with the disappearance, it begins with what's left behind. Because search and rescue teams across multiple regions have reported eerily similar patterns that defy logic, turning routine operations into quiet nightmares. And as dawn breaks over dense forest footage, the narration explains how these searches often start with confidence dogs, helicopters and volunteers fanning out in systematic grids, only for that confidence to erode when the evidence refuses to behave the way it should. Footprints stop abruptly in soft ground, not scattered or obscured by weather, but ending as if the person simply ceased moving forward. And in some cases, gear is found in places that make no sense: jackets folded, backpacks resting upright against trees, food untouched, maps still sealed in pockets, suggesting a deliberate choice rather than panic. And this is where fear creeps in for the searchers themselves. Because experienced outdoorsmen know that lost hikers cling to equipment. They don't abandon it. One report-style account describes a missing solo hiker whose phone last pinged from a shallow valley, no more than 2 kilometers from a main trail, a distance that should have been easily recoverable. Yet days of searching revealed nothing but his boots placed neatly side by side near a fallen log. No signs of struggle, no drag marks, no indication of injury. And when search dogs were brought in, they followed the scent for less than 100 meters before stopping abruptly, refusing to continue. Behavior handlers described as extremely unusual. As the video progresses, the narration explores how the forest actively sabotages rescue efforts, not through danger, but through confusion, radio signals weakening, unpredictable, GPS devices drifting off course by small but devastating margins, compasses spinning subtly rather than wildly, just enough to mislead without triggering suspicion, forcing teams to double back repeatedly without realizing it. And over time, fatigue sets in, not just physical exhaustion, but mental strain, as searchers describe feeling watched, uneasy, and disoriented in areas they've already passed through, as though the terrain itself is rearranging when no one is looking. Community impact deepens the horror, because families are left with no answers, only questions that grow heavier with time and towns near. Popular hiking regions quietly develop unspoken rules. Don't hike alone. Don't leave the trail even briefly. Don't follow sounds you can't explain. Rules passed down through whispers rather than signage. Because official explanations rarely satisfy those who've seen the patterns firsthand. The narration carefully avoids sensationalism, instead focusing on the psychological toll of uncertainty, the way unresolved disappearances erode trust in the wilderness and replace awe with dread, And as the camera glides over endless tree lines, stretching beyond the horizon, the voice poses a chilling thought. What if these disappearances aren't random, but the result of a process disorientation, isolation, surrender that the forest has perfected over centuries? And as part 2 nears its end, the tone shifts from investigation to implication, reminding viewers that folklore often begins as explanation for patterns people can't yet understand. And in part 3, we turn to those ancient stories, survival testimonies, and the final terrifying question, whether the woods are merely indifferent or something far worse, before closing with a calm reminder to stay with True Terror Files official. Because the last chapter, Docenti asks, what happened to the lost hikers? It asks what the forest does to those who almost escape. Those who survive the forest rarely talk about what chased them out, because survival itself doesn't always mean escape. And as the final chapter opens on slow-moving footage of towering trees fading into mist, the narration explains that a small number of hikers do return exhausted, dehydrated, and psychologically altered in ways that doctors and investigators struggle to explain. Individuals who insist they followed trails that should have led out, only to arrive back where they started hours later, paths looping impossibly, landmarks subtly shifting, and silence pressing in so completely that even their own footsteps sounded as if belonging to someone else. One survivor account describes the sensation of the forest closing in, not physically, but mentally, where decisions felt delayed, thoughts blurred, and an overwhelming urge to stop moving settled in without warning. A dangerous calm that experts recognize as a precursor to surrender. And this is where ancient folklore quietly intersects with modern psychology, because cultures across continents share eerily similar warnings stories. Oh, forests that test travelers, spirits that mimic familiar voices, trails that appear only to lead deeper, not outward legends often dismissed as superstition, yet describing behaviors identical to what survivors report today. The narration draws careful connections without claiming the impossible, suggesting instead that these stories may be early attempts to explain a very real phenomenon, where disorientation, fear, and isolation combine into something that feels deliberate, almost intelligent. And the deeper you resist, the more the woods seem to respond, with sudden weather shifts, unnatural quiet, or the unsettling feeling of being observed from just beyond the tree line. Modern research supports fragments of this terror, revealing how dense forests can distort sound, scramble spatial memory, and break a person's internal navigation system within hours. Yet science alone fails to explain why some people sense specific forbidden directions, or why multiple survivors describe reaching an invisible boundary they could not cross until dawn, as if the forest released them only when it was finished. As the story approaches its end, the tone slows, urging viewers to consider the uncomfortable truth that the wilderness does not owe us safety, and that many disappearances may not involve dramatic events at all, but something quieter: confusion, hesitation, one wrong choice repeating until energy runs out, and the woods, ancient and patient, simply waiting. The final message is not fear, but respect, as the narration reminds us that preparation, caution, and humility are the only defenses against environments that have existed far longer than human memory. And as the screen fades to black, a final question lingers. When hikers vanish without a trace, are they taken? Or do they slowly become part of the forest itself, remembered only by the paths that lead nowhere? Before the outro invites viewers to reflect, comment, and share their own unsettling experiences, gently encouraging a like and subscription to True Terror Files Official, where the stories don't rely on monsters, but on the terrifying truth that sometimes nature doesn't chase you, it simply waits.